Let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Insights from Women Leaders event. My name is Rola Kaakeh. For those that don't know me, I'm the CEO of Salus Vitae Group, and I will be the host for the event. Now, for those that have joined us at several other events or even one other, welcome. We're so happy that you are joining us again for this conversation. Now, for those that are new to the series, I just want to provide a little background on the Insights from Women Leaders series. We launched it in October of 2020 as a platform to hear from women leaders with varied backgrounds and perspectives on the topics of leadership, addressing current and future challenges, what skills we need moving forward, and how their experiences have shaped their outlook. Now, the goal of the series is to learn from women thought leaders and decision makers to empower current and future leaders, both men and women, to positively impact their organizations and communities. Now, diversity of thought, experiences, industries, education, and training is important to us as it highlights the mosaic of perspectives that are represented in different settings that help drive decision-making and positive change. Now, our guests have included leaders from various prestigious and reputable institutions and organizations from across the globe. Their backgrounds are diverse, their accomplishments many, and the insights and perspectives they provided have been extremely valuable. Now, I encourage everyone to check out the recordings of all the other previous guest leaders if you haven't already done so. They're all available on our website. Now, today, over the course of an hour, I'm going to ask our guest leader a number of questions. I'm going to start first, and then I'll actually open it up to audience questions. So please submit any questions that you may have in the Q&A box. If you submit them to the chat, we also see that, but we tend to address the Q&A box first. We also encourage you both during and after the event to post any key takeaways that you have, maybe in the Q&A box, or you can post them also on social media, and then tag us at Salus Vitae Group, because we always love to hear how you benefited from the various insights and experiences of our distinguished guest leaders. Now, the session today will be recorded and available for replay after the event. So let's go ahead and get started. I am pleased to introduce and welcome our guest leader today, Susan Cantrell. Susan joined AMCP, or the Academy of Managed Care Pharmacy, as Chief Executive Officer in 2016. In this role, she leads the organization in fulfilling its mission to improve patient health by ensuring access to high-quality, cost-effective medications and other therapies. She works to advance AMCP's policies to address rising healthcare costs and facilitates work to shift towards paying for value in healthcare. In 2019, she oversaw the award-winning AMCP rebranding effort. A former practicing pharmacist in hospital, home infusion, and specialty pharmacy, Susan has spent much of her career in the healthcare association industry, serving as Vice President of Resource Development at the American Society of Health System Pharmacists, or ASHP, and Senior Vice President and Managing Director Americas for the Drug Information Association before joining AMCP. She's a graduate of University of Mississippi School of Pharmacy and completed a certificate in public health from the University of North Carolina School of Public Health. She frequently speaks on health policy issues and topics related to quality and value in healthcare, and is currently chair of the USP Biologics Sector and a member of the board of directors of the Pharmacy Quality Alliance. Reflecting her passion for mentorship and support of student pharmacists and young practitioners, Susan is co-author of 2 books providing career advice for pharmacists. So Letters to a Young Pharmacist, Advice on Life and Career from Extraordinary Pharmacists, and then Letters from Rising Pharmacy Stars, Advice on Creating and Advancing Your Career in Changing Professions. But definitely the advice that she's going to provide, I think, is going to be pertinent to all of us, whether you are or are not pharmacists. So we are so happy to welcome you today, Susan, and we look forward to this conversation.
I'm delighted to be with you, Rola.
So let's start out the way we start out all of these different events. And so for those that are new, you will notice as you go through many of these guest leaders, we ask them very similar questions. But where the exciting part is in the diversity of the responses and the diversity of people's experiences. So the first question we always start out with is, did you expect to be where you are today?
Never. and actually, I ask people that question quite a bit as well. Within my network and people I meet. And I think I've yet to find anyone who said, yes, they scripted their pathway to get to where they were and they absolutely expected to be there. I'd like to meet those people though. but I didn't. A career in association leadership is not something that's top of mind, or certainly wasn't for me when I was in pharmacy school. What drew me to the practice of pharmacy was a job that I had in high school as a clerk in a local community pharmacy in the hometown where I grew up in Mississippi. And I saw the impact that the pharmacists in that store had on the local community and how they were healthcare providers. And this was a long time ago. So it was before our profession made the transition to the All PharmD program. But nevertheless, they were patient care providers and had impressive relationships with the whole community that they served. That drew me to the profession of pharmacy. I thought it was a real opportunity to help people, and I saw myself going into community pharmacy. But as you mentioned, my career has taken a number of twists and turns, and my getting into association leadership was, quite frankly, by happenstance, brought about by a geographic move to the Washington, D.C. area. And I saw an opportunity that I was interested in at ASHP, and that's what drew me to the association profession. Never thought that I would make that my life's work, but it's the perfect marriage to me of two things that I love, association leadership, and then pharmacy and the larger healthcare ecosystem, the ability to help people, to advance the profession of pharmacy, to also help patients get medicines that they need at a cost they can afford through the work that we here at AMCP do. I just think it's the perfect fit for me.
That's wonderful. Yeah, no, that's a good question. We always get curious too. And I think that's why we start out with it, is just knowing people's what their thought process and to bring them to where they are today. I think, like you had mentioned, some people, you don't know the exact steps. I think even among our guest leaders, you have a mix of those that say, yes, they kind of had an idea, but you never really can expect all the little milestones or all the little opportunities that come your way. So, and then like you had mentioned, there were several also others that pleasantly, as they say it, there's no way they could have expected to. And there's always that smile on their face, because it always turns out that you twist and turn to what fits your skills and how you build that. So that's really nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the future in mind, and then we're going to talk about a lot of the work that you guys are doing too in the present. But just thinking back to, as you're listening to your own bio every time, or kind of looking at your own career, as you look forward, what do you want, what's in your future? What do you want your legacy to be?
So I don't know that I really have focused on building a legacy, but probably when you get to my stage of career, you start to think a little bit about that. And I think the work that we do here at AMCP will certainly be a part of that. You mentioned, Rola, in my bio, the focus on shifting to value-based payment in our healthcare system. And we all know that for many years, we've been struggling in the U.S. with the rising cost of healthcare, access to healthcare, now certainly racial and ethnic disparities in healthcare access and delivery have been brought to light in a way that they haven't before. And so there's so many burning issues out there that we as health professionals, as association leaders, need to address. And I think when I look back on my career and profession, I really would aspire to feel like I've had an impact on those around me, but also on healthcare as well, through the work that we do here at AMCP, along with our other pharmacy colleagues in different associations, as well as those in the broader healthcare ecosystem. I recall many years ago, one of our ASHP Harvey A.K. Whitney Award winners gave a lecture. It was Jim McAllister. I won't remember the year, but it stuck in my mind. And the title of that lecture was, "What Will Be Your Legacy?" And he talked about thinking about your legacy and what impact that you want to have as you look back on your career. So that really resonated with me. I can't say I've devoted enough time to that, but probably should.
So do you find yourself when you're thinking about legacy, which is great, do you find yourself, because you've very much been very career oriented, it consumes a lot of kind of your thoughts, do you think of it primarily when someone asks you as kind of your profession or your, you know, what you're doing professionally, or do you kind of begin to merge that and think about it as something that kind of does bleed over to what you also aspire to do kind of on a personal basis?
I think it's all of that, and I think we don't do it justice if we don't think about it in totality on the personal side as well as the professional side. So I have some organizations, for example, that their mission really speaks to me, nonprofit organizations that I align myself with and try to support as much as I can, because their missions really resonate with me and they exist to help people. So I see myself when work doesn't consume my life anymore, spending more time with organizations like that. I think another thing when I think about legacy too, and something that's important to me personally and professionally, is how we treat people and how we interact with others. We've worked hard in this organization, AMCP, to really build a positive culture. And I've seen the results of that as we transitioned so rapidly and unexpectedly, as did everyone, a year ago into a remote working environment, with all the stress that went along with the uncertainty of the pandemic, and parents of young children all of a sudden homeschooling their children, and all of those challenges. And I really saw the value of the culture that we've worked hard to build in terms of helping us cope with all that. We focus on a number of values in the organization, but internally, several things that we really talk about. They make up an acronym that we call CHART, and it's collaborative, high performing, accountable, accountable for the work that we do. And then the last two that I think are particularly important are respect and trust. And it really speaks to me on how we should be interacting with each other. And that's the way we treat each other here at AMCP. And I think on the personal side, we could all learn from that. I've been thinking of, I write a monthly blog that's published on our website. And as I have thought about topics, one thing that's come to mind, I haven't gotten around to writing this one yet, but it's caring as a leadership value. And I've seen over the past 14 to 15 months how, you know, we might be business driven in normal times. We're really focused on meeting timelines and, you know, key performance indicators and achieving our expectations for metrics. But sometimes you have to dial that back a little bit, and you have to think about what your staff, your colleagues, your peers, and others are going through, and put some perspective to how you apply business expectations. And we certainly have done that here, and I know so many others who have as well. I will say the last 14 to 15 months have been a learning experience, if that's a small silver lining to what we've all faced. It really has taught us a lot, I think.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love the chart. I'm going to actually also write that down. I'm going to listen to the recording later too, and also make sure to write that down, because I think that's pertinent to everybody. And like you mentioned, it might seem simple as a concept in terms of how you treat people, but it does bleed into both personal, professional, and it ultimately impacts, right, the type of legacy and the type of, you know, either person or feedback or, you know, impact you want to make, because people also really remember how you made them feel, how you respected them, how you trusted them. And I think that translates to helping a lot of people even identifying their own abilities and their own way of impacting their organization. So I think that's absolutely wonderful. So when you actually even think about, you know, your own outlook on things now, whether it's now or really your future outlook, have you found that you've always thought that way, or have your past or present experiences really shaped that outlook? You mentioned right now the pandemic had really brought certain things to the forefront in terms of making sure that you care about the people and have those groups. But how, kind of thinking through your own career, has that been built, or that outlook has been built for you?
So I think it starts even before I was started down my career path. It's what I learned at home growing up, that treat others with respect, caring, empathy, and I think I had a good basis of those values many, many years ago from my mother and others around me. And I think that's really helpful. But I do think the lessons that we've learned and the lessons that we continue to learn in our career, in our interaction with others on the personal or the professional side can teach us so much. We always laugh about teaching an old dog new tricks, but there's never been a point in my life where I haven't felt like I could learn something from someone. And thinking about the last 14 or 15 months that we thankfully now have behind us, certainly the pandemic taught us so many lessons on the healthcare side as well as on the personal side. But also the injustices that were brought forward last summer and became so front and center. I think that was an awakening for so many people. And I'll say that I was really proud that AMCP joined with other national pharmacy associations to commit to, in a very public statement, combating racial injustice and also healthcare disparities. And that's something that my organization, AMCP, has really taken to heart. One of our 3 strategic priorities approved by our board earlier this year was to combat disparities, racial and ethnic disparities in healthcare as it relates to medication use. And so we have a roadmap for action that we've been shaping on that. We're taking it very seriously. We know there's much work to do, but we're looking at all elements, benefit design, what evidence is developed and available to really inform utilization of medications in certain populations, especially minority populations, affordability, access, all of those issues we'll be looking at over the next couple of years as we address how to close that gap. So I think, there's no end to what I've learned. I know personally, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I imagine others feel similarly that awareness has been certainly raised on a number of issues. And it likely, what we've experienced over the last year or so likely has helped better equip us to be leaders in the future, I think.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point in terms of your willingness to constantly learn new things, or not necessarily even learn what seems to be simple in terms of the actual, we should know that, but at the same time bringing that to the forefront and stepping up when needed to address those. So as we're constantly learning new things, how do we use that information to build better systems? And like you mentioned, you guys are working on different initiatives there, and we're happy to link any of those types of resources for our audience as well, because I know that this topic is very important to many people in terms of as they're learning and they're trying to build their systems to make them better for everyone. So when we talk about also your own career, people talk about careers in general, we often highlight what we've accomplished and what we've done and what's so great, but we know that there's always been challenges. There's always challenges also associated with kind of quote unquote success or these milestones that we reach. And so would you be willing to maybe share some challenges or failures that you experienced and how you overcame them?
How much time do we have? No, kidding. Kidding. Yeah, and I can think of so many things. One thing that was pivotal early in my career was, and I actually wrote about this, Rola, in the book that you mentioned, the First Letters book, Letters to a Young Pharmacist, which, by the way, was one of the funnest things that I did, have done a long time. Teamed up with Sarah White and Bruce Scott. We really enjoyed hearing the stories and reading the stories of so many extraordinary people in both of those books. But an experience that I talked about in the first book was when I didn't get a job that I really wanted. And I thought that the job was mine for the taking. And I had kind of picked up on that vibe from the interview process. And I was very excited about it. And then likewise, extremely disappointed when I didn't get it. But I realized at some point when I looked back on it that not getting that job led me down a different path in my career. And that got me to where I am today. Probably had I gotten that job, I might not have had the additional experience that I needed to get my first job in the association world and then to eventually move here to AMCP. So looking back on it, it was a good thing. And I think that was a lesson for me, you know, what appears to be something when things don't go your way, it may be in the long run, not such a bad thing. So you have to approach it. You have to be accepting of those setbacks. You have to handle it professionally, which I worked really hard to do that, not burn any bridges, which we all know is so critical in our profession and in healthcare in general. And then to move forward, you know, put it in your rearview mirror and just use it as a learning experience and move forward. So I would say that was one of those experiences. Another thing, and this actually went my way, so I can't say that it was a failure, but it was a valuable learning experience for me in working with my boss many years ago, a CEO, and I made a case for something that I thought was a no-brainer at the time and would be easily accepted. And that particular CEO had a different perspective on it and saw it in a different way than I did. And just navigating the process and the negotiation that we went through to get to an answer. And it turned out it went my way, but I had to use all of the negotiation and I guess influence skills that I had in my toolbox to be able to get there. But that dialogue about understanding a viewpoint that was very different than mine at the time, but then working together to get to a compromise and knowing that, you know, I wasn't the ultimate decision maker. So I had to do what I could to influence that outcome. And then if it didn't go my way, again, you know, move on, accept it, move on, make the best of it. But I think that was a really important learning experience for me as well. So there's so many like that. And I work in this role with a lot of students. We have student chapters at AMCP that I'm privileged to be able to speak to sometimes, and sometimes travel to colleges of pharmacy and speak to groups of students. And some of those nuggets that, you know, I never thought about when I was at that stage in my career, but looking back on it proved to be such valuable learning experiences. I do like to share those any time that I can, because I think if I'd known then what I know now, I might have slept a little bit better and been a little bit less anxious at times.
No, I like that, because I think recognizing that it's going to exist in terms of the challenges we have, and I like the second example too, that you still kind of, in the end, you got your way, but recognizing there was many challenges and it was still an uphill, an uphill to climb. So I think recognizing both that there's going to be failures and that failures, and I don't recall who said this, but it's not rejection, it's redirection, right? Like, so that oftentimes when we recognize that, but then also recognizing that even getting our way is going to involve many challenges. And so I think that equips us with a different mindset, like you had mentioned, and it allows you to relax a little bit and kind of focus your energy where you can put your energy best. So when we do talk about, and I think many of us kind of live within this kind of future, we have, a part of our thought process that thinks a lot about the future. So as we're thinking a lot about the future, we also think about what skills we need to equip ourselves with as we move to address those challenges. So what do you think are some top skills that people should really focus on to address these challenges?
certainly communication is and forever will be a critical skill in any workplace and in our personal lives as well. So that's always been important to me, is how do we sharpen our communication skills? And I have to say, working with students as we do, we have a number who rotate with us here at AMCP on their API rotations. And I've been constantly impressed with the caliber of communications. And I know now, as part of the curriculum, there's a high degree of interaction that takes place at the patient level. And so the students come to us and they're good communicators. And I think that is so important. I mentioned influence and negotiation, and that really serves you well as well. We see in our lives right now, if we use, so I'm here in Old Town Alexandria, right across the river from Capitol Hill, and we spend a fair amount of time advocating on behalf of our organization's members and our mission. And Congress doesn't set a good example for us. The politicians don't set a good example for us in terms of how they interact with one another and how they do or don't get to compromise. And I think that's a valuable skill, and I think we need to pay a lot more attention to that in the future. And then dealing with adversity and figuring out how to, a word I promised myself at the end of 2020 I wouldn't use in 2021, but I can't think of a quick replacement, so I'll say it, and that's pivot. Pivoting as a leadership skill might be maybe another blog I'll think about in the future, but agility in leadership has never been more critical than it is in today's environment, where you think you're on a path, you set your strategy, and then all of a sudden it's disrupted, and you have to change on a dime, and really reallocate resources, potentially bring in new talent to do things that need to be done. I think some of us in the association world have seen how moving from these large meetings and conferences during the pandemic to a virtual platform really challenged us, but we stepped up and we were able to do it. And so there's that feeling of accomplishment that goes along with it. Although I'll tell you, I can't wait to get back to our live meetings and conferences where we can actually see people and, personally build our network. But I think all of those things are critically important. The agility and, preparing for disruptions. We had a keynote speaker at our recent AMCP annual meeting, Dr. Frida Lewis Hall, such an inspiring person. And she said something that really resonated. She said a lot of things that resonated with me, but one thing was something her mother used to tell her, and it was, don't let the storm disrupt your journey, let it clear your path. And I thought, wow, is that a leadership lesson or what, in dealing with adversity and the challenges that we dealt with over the last year? So I think those are all critical.
Yeah, those are wonderful. Yeah, I think we often read, especially if you're are interested in leadership, a lot about how people used to say good leaders are agile, they quickly either pivot or kind of understand the circumstance and move. But that was definitely tested during the pandemic, like you mentioned. Even those examples of these associations, I loved in-person conferences, so I missed those too. But I mean, just from going from that, it's a whole other ballpark to now take it and make it online and try to get the same quality that was delivered. And so yeah, those are all various big challenges, but your ability to quickly pivot while also caring about, like you had mentioned, putting that chart at the beginning is actually really important. So now let's just talk about some of the current work you guys are doing that you're really excited about. I mean, the topic of improving access and lowering costs, that's been a huge topic too for many years, but I feel like the public now has been a little bit more involved or more curious, or the conversations maybe have shifted or increased. So what current initiatives are you working on that would like to share with us?
So our board went through a strategy development process over several months, beginning in the fall of last year, that carried us through early spring. and to really hone our organizational priorities for the next couple of years. We put a shorter timeline on it than we typically would, knowing that we were still dealing with a tremendous amount of unpredictability in the environment. But three things that arose out of that, we're really focused on what we're calling smart membership growth in the organization, attracting those prospective members who need what we have to offer and can contribute to the work of the organization with their expertise. So that's our more internal membership focused priority. But the other two are definitely related to many things happening in the environment right now. The second is optimizing value and access. And then the third I mentioned earlier is addressing healthcare disparities, specifically as it relates to medication use. So those are our three major priorities. When we think about optimizing value and access, our organization has long been focused on paying for value as the best way to address improving affordability, access, and containing the rising costs of healthcare. Let's don't pay for things that aren't working, right? Makes a lot of sense. And other sectors of the healthcare community have really been moving in that direction for a long time. It's not easy to do, though, when you think about paying for pharmaceuticals, paying for the pharmacy benefit, and then how do we balance that, too, with all of the innovation that's happening in the world of pharmaceuticals and biotechnology. Catastrophic diseases that previously had no treatment are now being brought under control, and we have curative therapies in some cases that are being brought to market. We have to be able to fuel that innovation engine, and nobody does it better than we do it here in the United States. So it's critically important that we have that right balance. But we're challenged to afford these innovations. So that's something that we really are focusing on. How do we assess value? What are payment models that would help encourage paying for value? How do we incentivize appropriate medication use through our payment models? All of those things. How do we eliminate low value care, which I think we don't devote enough time broadly in the healthcare environment to talking about and exploring ways to do that. And then on the disparity side, we pulled together a couple of months ago a group of stakeholders in an invitational format, experts on this issue of healthcare disparities from a variety of communities, managed care, academia, all across the healthcare sector, patient organizations, and others, and talked about what are the elements that contribute to healthcare disparities and how do we address those. So over the next couple of years and beyond, you'll hear AMCP talking a lot about that important issue. We have a call for papers that was issued a few months ago in our journal, so we'll be publishing more and more on the issue. Very important issue going forward, and really something that we'd like to engage a number of partners in our work.
Yeah, there's a lot of great work. I think also AMCP, for those in our audience, also provide wonderful resources in various different capacities on these topics, because I know this is a topic that I've been within this space in terms of access to medications. So I know many people are interested in it in general. And I think because the advantage is that we're having a lot more of these conversations with regards to how do we look at it, because I mean, I've been in this space for a while, but I've never had so many conversations about the pharmaceutical supply chain and where the costs are going and everything. So there's definitely that opportunity there, so that interest there, which allows us all to really kind of step up to think about how we can all work towards improving access to medications, right? It's not just the pharmacist. So I think organizations like AMCP that really bring in together to these diverse stakeholders, like you had mentioned, I think kind of reiterate the need for more diverse individuals to be kind of part of that solution, whether it's in the disparity space, or all the way to looking at payment models within that as well. So for you, as you're thinking about, these are very big areas with different metrics of quote unquote success, or, how do you start thinking about success in general? Is there a way that you define it in terms of the initiatives that you're working on and say, hey, this was a successful initiative, or this particular thing was a success? Like, how do you start thinking about success, either in your own position, in your position now, or just in general?
So there are many ways that we do that, and we ponder that quite a bit, especially with some of these big areas, optimizing value and access. What are the clear metrics to show that we as an organization are having an impact on that, or that we as an organization are closing gaps when it comes to healthcare disparities? And how do we actually measure that? Part of what we do is look to our members to tell us what they see as success. A number of our members' organizations are involved in these efforts as well, and they're able to provide guidance. And an organization can only do so much. It's all about the membership, right? And so we see some great models out there. SCAN Healthcare is one that I'll mention, and we have members that work for SCAN Health Plan. The issue of healthcare disparities permeates everything that they do. So using something like that as a model that we can disseminate to others, I think is helpful. And then measuring uptake on that. How many other organizations have put measures in place? I'm constantly amazed and impressed when I talk to our members about some of the work that they're doing that doesn't get the notoriety that, quite frankly, it should. And so how do we bring that forward? How do we surface that so that we're sharing best practices? And then, of course, part of this work will involve advocacy. Are there policy-related issues that we should be advocating for that would address some of these challenges? And I think the answer to that is yes. Now, that's pretty easy to measure what kind of traction we get on that if we're looking to see if we can get legislation passed or influence the regulatory process. Pretty easy to measure, very difficult to do, though. But I think those are some of the ways that we're looking at it. And then, of course, internally, measurement is something that we look at as we monitor our performance and the performance of our staff. So we have specific ways to do that, but learning from others, too, is part of our strategy.
Yeah. I like the approach of not only thinking of the success for you, either as an individual or as an organization, but is it deemed successful for those that you are serving? So you mentioned talking a lot to your members to see what they define or what they consider success, and then going beyond that. And I think that's a wonderful way of thinking about success too, because we're often measuring it internal. We're thinking about how do we think about it, but ultimately you're thinking internal and then external, and then you're kind of bringing it back, which I think is very useful for many people as they start thinking about kind of the circle of success, as as we think about that overall. Let's actually transition a little bit to leadership in general, leadership, mentorship, and kind of that whole area. So we ask all of our leaders, how would you describe a leader in, like, I think I only gave you guys 2 sentences. So you said, great leaders inspire those around them with confidence, vision, and the will to excel. They measure their success not by what they alone achieve, but by what they help others achieve. Can you elaborate on this and really what has shaped your outlook for this?
Sure. And Rola, this goes back to what we talked about earlier, the lessons that we learn along the way. And I know early in my career, I was very focused on what do I need to do? How can I have an impact here? How can I succeed? Probably managing people, which I started doing very early in my career. And, that was a very interesting learning experience as well, I'll say. Managing people, you realize it's a lot less about I and a lot more about the organization or the mission that you're trying to achieve, the outcomes that you're looking and to achieve. And so focusing on that, you realize I can't do much on my own, right? I can only do so much. And but when collectively I work with this team of people, or in the case of AMCP, our staff, our members, our volunteer committees, our board of directors, and all of those, collectively, the work that we do is much more impactful and influential than what I singularly can do. My thinking on that evolved over time, and I became less, I mean, I always want to do my best, don't get me wrong. I certainly don't like those failures that have come along the way. I like to celebrate the successes, but at the same time, the greatest successes that I've achieved in my career have been because of the community that I've worked with, the group of people, the team. And so I think looking at it that way, that's how I view leadership now, is all about leading and inspiring others. And I wish there was a magic formula to that. If someone knows about it, please let me know, because you know, again, you learn from what goes right and what goes wrong. I still think I have a lot left to learn on that, but that is, in my opinion, the key to leadership success and what we should really strive to do.
Yeah. So throughout your career in the various different positions, and kind of as you've learned of leadership, teach it, mentor others, what do you think we're getting wrong about leadership? Or what are you often hearing that you're just like, no, that doesn't work? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in some cases, what we just talked about, you know, this I focus, and I don't know about you, but in my career, I have met, unfortunately, some who were, you know, focused on their own image and less so on what they were trying to achieve as a group or an organization or a company. And, you know, I think that is not the right approach. And I think if you are in a leadership position, certainly there's an element of ego that goes along with all of us, but you really have to dial that back too, right? And think about the greater good and what it is that you're trying to achieve. And it's not about self-aggrandization, it's really about achievement. And so that's what I would say is a fatal flaw. One other thing, and that I've seen over time, and that I've really taken to heart, is probably the biggest injustice a leader can do himself or herself or their self is to surround themselves with people who either think exactly like they do or may think differently, but they're unwilling to challenge that leader. And, you know, I always think that being able to see ourselves through the eyes of others would be such a great gift. It might be painful in many cases, but it would be a great gift. But we don't have the luxury of being able to do that. So in my opinion, we need to surround ourselves with people who, like you mentioned at the very beginning of this broadcast, had diversity in their thinking, their experiences, their backgrounds, their ethnicity. We could go on and on, but that diversity of thought and perspectives and experiences is so critical in helping us think in different ways. So to me, not doing that, not surrounding yourself with people who think differently and have different perspectives, or are willing to challenge yours, can be a big mistake. And I could think of a few examples where we've seen that in the past in a big way in specific leaders. So I aspire not to do that in my own setting.
Yeah. And I like your emphasis of not only just surrounding yourself, but your willingness to learn from them or for them to teach you. So oftentimes it's not just a matter of surrounding yourself, but actually how do you listen well to then implement what you need to, or how do you kind of optimize those interactions together where it's not just merely diversifying. So throughout your career as well, and we had mentioned this, and especially with your involvement with the different books around advice. So you've mentioned several different items throughout the conversation we've had thus far, but what would you say are some top leadership advice you could provide our audience?
So I would say, as we think, and I know your audience is quite a mix of people at different stages of their career, including student pharmacists. There's so much we can all learn. I would say be open-minded and accepting that the best laid plans may be disrupted. To Dr. Lewis Hall's comment earlier, let it to clear your path. So that open-mindedness, I think I keep thinking about this caring as a leadership value and how important it is, something that we might not always think about. But I think we certainly should. And because I've said it on your broadcast, I probably will eventually have to write that blog that's been on my mind
now we're
for
all
so
looking
long.
forward to it.
Yes. So I promise I'll do that eventually. And then, respecting of others, back to our chart values, that respect and trust, building relationships is such a critical part of what we do in our personal lives as well as our professional lives. And in the world of pharmacy, I always say, don't burn any bridges because this is a small community. And I've been astounded over the years at how many people who I've run into after at one point in my career, and then again, a decade or so later, and or people that know people that I know. So it really is a small, close-knit, interconnected community, and building and maintaining relationships within that community is so critically important. The book that we talked about earlier, the first volume of that, it was just an idea that I had one day, and a person who's always been an inspiration to me for such a long time is Sarah White, former director of pharmacy at University of Kansas and then Stanford. And she's now one of the busiest retired people I've ever met in my life. And, she and I keep in touch, and we have for a long time. And I just floated that idea with her, and, she jumped on it. She said, "Oh, this is a great idea, and I think we should do this, and let's do it this way." And, she became my partner so quickly. And I think building those relationships where you can leverage them and do some interesting, and in our case, fun things together, really serves us well and increases our professional satisfaction as well as our personal satisfaction. So I guess those would be the major things I would think of.
Yeah, no, I only spoke to Sarah once. Yeah, she's so busy because we were part of a group that was doing a paper or commentary on leadership. And so, of course, when you think about that, especially in the pharmacy world, she's definitely the go-to person. But my colleague told me she's retired. I was like, really? She seems very, very busy. So that's why I smiled when you said that. So we do, before we go to the audience Q&A, we do always kind of end this section with the same question as well, which is we usually like to take an opportunity to support one another and really recognize the positive influence we have on one another. Can you name a woman who has inspired you, and why did you choose this person? And in fairness, there's been several leaders that have chosen two. So you can do one or two.
Oh gosh, I have a list of about 100. I guess that's too many, right?
Yes, exactly. That's a little bit above the two, Susan.
There are so many women leaders, and I guess recently my blog post that I wrote was during Women's History Month, and it was in the month of March, I think it was, and I did call out two people in healthcare. These aren't people that I personally know, But just if I think about those leadership qualities that I just mentioned, they certainly do exhibit those. Several years ago, I happened to be in the airport, and I saw, I was looking for a book to read on the plane, and I saw Atul Gawande's book, Better. You know, he hadn't published so many well-known books at the time, and I hadn't heard of him before, and I just picked up the book on a whim and read it, and, you know, was just fascinated by it. And one of the stories he tells in the book is about Virginia Apgar, and that story stuck with me and still does today. There's so many lessons that we could learn from Virginia Apgar. So she graduated from medical school back in the 30s, and she obviously, you probably recognize her name. She invented the Apgar score that is used for newborns. And her story was so inspiring to me because she wanted to be a surgeon. And she graduated like fourth in her class at Columbia Medical School and did a surgery residency. But she was convinced by one of her mentors, Alan Whipple, to pursue a different path. You know, surgery was not something a lot of women did back then, and she was the only female resident in her class. And so he encouraged her to get into anesthesiology. And she did that, and, you know, look at the impact that she had. Maybe you could argue that she should have stuck to her path, but, you know, I think she realized the wisdom of perhaps listening to this mentor, and then she went on to create something that, you know, has saved the lives of millions of children. So that was very inspiring to me. There's another woman, too, that's a little bit closer to the work that I do in pharmacy, but again, a little bit removed and not someone that I know, but that's Dr. Francis Kelsey. And I wrote about her story as well. Dr. Kelsey, back in the 60s, worked at the Food and Drug Administration, and part of her role was to review drug applications. And at the time she was there, thalidomide was being proposed as a treatment for nausea and vomiting in women who were pregnant, and it was being widely used in Europe, had been approved in a number of other countries, and Dr. Kelsey was charged with leading the review of that drug. Well, she saw some things in the data that caused her concern, and she also didn't think there was enough safety data to say that we could use this in pregnant women. And so what did she do? She put the brakes on it and prevented thalidomide at the time from being approved for morning sickness. And how many children might have suffered from catastrophic birth defects had that drug been approved for use in the U.S., had it not been for Francis Kelsey. And, you know, she had immense pressure. Here's this woman scientist, you know, probably a bit in the minority in terms of gender at the FDA at the time, I would imagine. And she had to stand up to, you know, the others in the FDA, to the company that really was pushing for the drug to be approved. But she stood her ground, and in doing so had an important impact on humanity. So I could name off so many others, but I think because I wrote about those recently, they're top of mind for me and provide a tremendous amount of inspiration.
Yeah, definitely inspiration, and the ability to kind of like the take homes very much is around your impact of going back to our initial conversation around redirection and how ultimately you still can make a big impact when you've redirected. And then the second one is really standing up when you know that it's the right thing to do, even when it's really hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think that's really great. So I did get a question right now. It's a big question, so we're going to have to try you. And I think you get this all the time, but it's around drug prices. Drug prices continue to remain high. What are some things that we can do to help lower them? And I don't see here what if the person's a pharmacist or whatnot. So maybe just kind of as a very generic, is there things that we can think about or do or to help try to lower drug prices?
So certainly that's top of mind for all of us in healthcare right now, and for consumers. You know, we've seen a lot of data on how seriously consumers take lowering the cost of medications. And, you know, I differentiate between pricing and cost because what we're really trying to do is improve affordability. So there have been a number of proposals. It'll be interesting to see, I think, in this session of Congress, if anything gains traction. Certainly there's doesn't seem to be a lot of common ground between the two sides of the aisle right now, but stranger things have happened. So we'll see what happens. In our organization, we went through a process a few years ago to really hone our messaging around the rising cost of healthcare and the rising cost of pharmaceuticals into three main areas that we're advocating for. And one of those is the ability to use certain tools and strategies to address cost. And those are things that we call managed care tools and strategies, but measures that payers and others can put into place to help ensure that the therapy that's being provided is cost effective as well as appropriate for the patient. So that's an important issue. The second part of the three-part platform is really looking at evidence that's available and shifting that to this mindset of paying for value. So assessing evidence and using what we have at our disposal to make sure that we're optimizing the use and the value of the innovations that exist. And then the third is being able to employ methods that allow us to, I'll categorize it as competitive marketplace. So a competitive marketplace that provides alternatives that might be less expensive than others and available to use in the right patients. And we talk about that as we think about especially the generic products as well as biosimilars, now that we have 20 some odd biosimilars on the market. So those are our three really areas that we advocate for in terms of addressing the continuing rising cost of healthcare in general and pharmaceuticals specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great overview, because we all know it's a lot more complicated and detailed than that. But I think the points in terms of the diversity of the types of stakeholders that will need to be involved, like you had mentioned, the payers and understanding the different decision makers. And I think also the different approach of what are we paying for and understanding the evidence. So there's so many different elements. And I think everybody, I think like this person is trying to mention, is that everyone has a role somehow, but it's recognizing who it is and who we have to work with and partner with. We are going to just do one last question before, because we're almost at time, or about at time, but that's just regarding some of your top communication skills, because communication skills is also a topic we talk a lot about in this series. So are there just a couple of things that you can leave us with in terms of how do we improve our communication skills? Sure.
I'm not an expert on communication, but a few things that have served me well. One thing is to think about not just how we communicate, but also how we influence. A lot of what we're trying to do, Rola, when we communicate with others is really influence opinions, outcomes, things like that. So spending time thinking about our ability to influence and how we sharpen that, I think, is a really important thing. Equally important to how we communicate ourselves is how we listen. And that's something that I personally try to work on all the time. I like to talk, and so.
Me too.
Yeah, but it's not always about hearing myself, right? It's about hearing what others have to say, and sharpening our listening skills, I think, serves us really well. So I would say influence and listening are just as important as how we communicate out our own messages to others.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I think I got that general theme too with what we're talking about in terms of very much like we're listening and then we're acting, we're listening and then we're acting. And then you continue to listen and build upon that. So that is wonderful. And I think that's something that many of our leaders were also talking about with regards to communication, is the important part of the listening aspect to effectively communicate, which is like what you mentioned initially, to ultimately and positively influence what you hope to achieve. So that has been wonderful. So we're at time. So are there any other closing remarks or final thoughts you'd like to add, Susan?
I actually want to pat you on the back for doing this. I think there's so much that we can learn from each other, and for you to use your platform to showcase women leaders and provide this diversity of thought and experience that we can all benefit from. I had an opportunity before today to listen to some of your previous participants, and took away so much from what they delivered. So kudos to you and your organization for bringing this forward. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk with you today.
Thank you so much for that. No, we're always so honored and humbled and thankful for all of you guys for taking the time. Each one of our guest leaders, and there's still so many we don't know about, are doing such exceptional things. And so if we can all learn from one another and all support each other, I think we're all winning in the end. So on behalf of Salus Vitae Group and myself, I'd really like to thank you, Susan, for joining us today and for sharing your experiences. There were several items. I loved the whole chart idea, the acronym, and I think that is something we need to all use. And so thank you again to all those that attended today. Please feel free to post any key takeaways or email us or message us and let us know how you benefited from the session today. There are several other guest leaders in the coming weeks, so you can register for all of those at salusvitaegroup.com and listen to all the other previous recordings as well. So thank you again, and I hope you all have a wonderful day, and until next time.